for, and I really want to begin by thanking the organizers of this public meeting for giving the attention that this topic deserves and the ongoing events in Iran that they deserve. It truly resonates with, the transnational agendas of gender-based politics and how across the globe women as well as other gender groups are trying to are establishing this struggle for better, more equal societies and gender equity in different societies. So I'm really not an expert either on feminism, but I'm really interested in general in the Middle East and the Middle Eastern politics that happens. So I would like to primarily focus on what's going on in Iran, and I'm sure Professor Menon can give much better insights into what we must be thinking right now. So I'll just share my ideas and my assessment of this and why this is happening right now with you. So when I spoke to Sarika in the beginning, she said that one of the primary themes we're dealing with is how women and women's clothes and women's desires or their liberty is always central to how totalitarian regimes exhibit control over their societies. And this brought, immediately it brought a poem to my mind. So I would like to, sort of begin by reciting this poem. It's in Hindi, and so the title of the poem is Aurat Ka Shareer, and it goes like, बस शरीर कह लो या कोई शब्द कह लो, अर्थ एक ही होगा औरत का शरीर। रानी कह लो या रंडी कह लो, निमित्त तो एक ही होगा औरत का शरीर। रानी को रंडी कह लो या रंडी को रानी कह लो, साध्य तो एक ही होगा औरत का शरीर। मेरे बाप दादाओं ने जब समाज रचा था, तभी औरत को शरीर में भरकर उस पर पुरुषार्थ की गांठ लगा दी थी। तब से न वो गांठ खुली न शरीर। हाँ, उस गांठ की सिद्धि में औरत का शरीर कभी रानी हो जाता है, कभी रंडी हो जाता है। शब्द कई हो जाते हैं, अलंकार बदल जाते हैं, लेकिन अर्थ एक ही रहता है, औरत का शरीर। So the reason I'm beginning with this is because in my mind there is no debate to the fact that not just totalitarian regimes but also sometimes democratic states use a woman's body and control over a woman's body to exhibit the kind of power and the kind of control they have over their own ideological spaces or their own geographical terrains. And Iran in this case is no different. In fact, for some of us, we think Iran is much, much more worse in a lot of things. And they have, the only thing different is that they have their own distinct history as to why they are here right now. So they have had their own history of imperialism, which is very different from ours, but one that I'm sure is similar in terms of the suffering of the people and the marginalization of the people and the looting of the resources. They had their brush of communism, which was thwarted in the 1950s coup when a populist president, Mogadegi, was removed from his position because he wanted the separation. He wanted the rights of the people to be paramount to the Pahlavi Shahs who ruled Iran at that point of time. And that ultimately, that coup established the dictatorship of Raza Shah Pahlavi, who then, much in the same way as Middle Eastern dictatorships exhibit themselves, showed himself to be this person who really believes in mechanization, in bringing science and technology to the Middle East and to all of these, to the people of Iran, and also sort of started using the name Iran in the international discourse. But and by the time he comes and he starts this revolution, which he calls the White Revolution, which in itself shows how very detached his own ideas of Iran were from that of the general masses. And the demography of that region is very significant to all of this. Iran is a region in the Middle East which has a majority population of Shias. And the Shias are a minority sect within Islam. So after I'm sure a lot of people already know what is the Shia-Sunni schism in Islam, which happens very early on. And they have been persecuted by various, the caliphates which had more hegemonic power, the Ahl-e Sunnat. So they have been a marginalized, persecuted community. And here they were in a region, they happened to be in a majority, and yet this dictatorial power did not allow any freedom of expression. It was frowned upon to be following religion. And so hijab was in a certain sense banned in that. So what happens in an atmosphere of this sort of right wing, and something that we see here in India happening right now also, is that one of the counter hegemonies that is going to come up is going to be one that will speak up for Islamic identity being oppressed in the region. And that is what happens when Ayatollah Khomeini sort of in the 70s, in this environment of really bad economy where the imperialist powers are taking most of the money that they can get from oil, and their economy is going, you know, into a sudden crisis. They see one of these very prominent counter hegemonies that come up is that which is led by Ayatollah Khomeini, which is the religious leadership of Shia Islam, and he is later exiled and he's in Germany. But in 78, when the Iranian revolution that, you know, a lot of us already know about, in 78 when that breaks out, it's not an Islamic revolution. It's a protest in which, you know, people come out to protest against the Shah, and they are brutally, the police brutally tries to, you know, stop them, and that leads to another waves and waves of protesters coming, which ultimately, you know, in 79 gets tagged as the Islamic Revolution. There are so many counter hegemonies against the Shah that have a role to play in those years between 78 and 79. And women particularly in this are a very important group, because they have been a part of this political narrative always, whether it is during the Shah's so-called white revolution regime where you can wear skirts, or whether it is after the Islamic Revolution gets established in Iran. So the women constitute one of the counter hegemonies, but my reading of it suggests that they are very fractured and they're part of different segments in the society. So when eventually in 79 Ayatollah Khomeini returns back to Iran, to you know, this victorious space where the Shah has left the position, and here's where it gets most interesting. There's a referendum that happens, and the majority of the people in the country vote for an Islamic Republic. And this referendum in essence is something that has mainly been the legitimizing factor for Ayatollahs to be doing whatever that they are doing in Iran also, as well as in terms of the global politics, where they say to sort of represent not just Iranian Shias, but also Shias across the world, and which is not untrue, because Shia Islam has a system of taqleed where you follow a Maulana, and a huge number of non-Iranian Shias actually follow Khomeini and Khamenei line, and that sort of a taqleed. So when they came to power immediately, so I do not wish to condemn those who were fighting for feminist rights or gender rights at that point of time so quickly, because yes, this is a fractured group of feminists, and feminism is a very fluid category still in the Middle East. So in the 1970s, you can imagine how confusing it was. And there is one group definitely that did not vote in favor of the referendum for Islamic community. So that is one group, and we can keep them aside. There are two other groups, one that gets deeply embedded of female activists talking about gender rights for women, one that gets deeply embedded within this clerical system, within this Islamic theocracy. So for instance, Vice President Iftikhar, who was the first female Vice President of Iran, and you know, other leaders like this who are part of their parliamentary system, they really believe that, you know, we'll get into this, and this is the purview. For them, Ayatollah Khomeini was the perfect leader, sort of. Then there was a group who did not want so much religious centric things, but they also knew that the geopolitics of the nation state meant that, you know, they have to make certain compromises. So they voted for an Islamic Republic, because despite all the Islamophobia, Islam does provide provisions for, you know, giving the concession to live your life as you want. For instance, you have La Iqra Fid Deen, which means that there can be no, you cannot dominate someone, or you cannot compel someone to follow a religion, or you have the concept of Lakum Deenukum Waliya Deen, which means that to you your own religion and to me mine. We are both free to practice as we want. And these feminists sort of, in a sort of blinded optimism, perhaps thought that they'll get this space to negotiate in the Iranian, after the revolution became the Islamic revolution. And but what essentially happened is that the Iranian revolution becoming Islamic meant that political Islam became established in Iran as a form of state. And political Islam itself has so many fractured fragments, and there has been so much debate on why it will continue to fail from all sides of academia. So I really don't want to go into that. But I want to focus that one of the primary ways in which political Islam shows control as a totalitarian regime is the veil. And so the veil came back to the Iranian women as early as the 80s. So 79 this happens, and by the end of 80s there's already discussion that they will come back. By 81 hijab is made mandatory in the workspaces, and at this point there is an entire group of women who start agitating. They're just not ready to accept this. This is not the foundation on which they had agitated against the Shah to replace one tyranny with another tyranny. But this is happening in the backdrop of the Iran-Iraq war. So this is a nascent state, so to speak, where in one way the use of public right or public opinion has been given some due importance through the referendum, and they are at war with Iraq, one of their neighbors. And so they quickly subdue this voice of dissent that came from the Iranian women at this stage. And they say that, in the interest of national security, and this becomes a pattern with the Iranian government, that in the interest of national security, we cannot take up your issues right now at this moment. Right. So what they then start doing is then start enforcing even more harsher measures. So after workplace hijab, it becomes mandatory everywhere. Then the right to consent for marriage for women decreases. Then you have custodial rights from women are being taken away. Then after that you find out you have to take your husband's permission to work, to get married, to even walk out of the house, and it starts happening. And every time this happens, there are protests in Iran. It's just that this is a world in the 80s, 90s we're talking about, which is not this globalized. We don't come to find out about it after, now that we read about the history of that region. And these protests, or this, I'll call it a youth revolution, this youth revolution that you're seeing in Iran is sort of a part of this process that has been going on since the very beginning and since the very establishment of the so-called Islamic Republic. So they protested against this in the late 90s, then in 2004, in 2005. Then there were massive revolutions in 2009, which is called the Green Revolution, where that the first time that they saw that their right to vote is being obliterated completely by the religious authority. So the Iranian people did not like it, and they raised their voices against it. And even in the last few years, there has been strikes in Iran continuously. It's just that they are considered to be small local events, and even in the social media space, it is so selective, we hardly get to know about it. And there's always this probability that 2 months from now, 3 months from now, we may not be speaking about this again. So we need to take the little opportunity that this region gets, because it has a very, very significant geopolitical, it has a very importance in terms of geopolitics in the region. It acts as a buffer zone to a lot of GCC countries. It keeps them in tows. So with that happening in Iran, I see this process as these protests, this revolution, as part of their story, as a part of continuing form of protest that they have been doing to establish a more democratic, a state in which, to be very frank, after the Green Revolution, it is evident that they want, which is one of the biggest fault lines of political Islam, they want a separation of their church and the state. Right? So they do not believe that the clerical system should be the supreme authority when it comes to state matters. They have been under sanctions. They are deprived of basic medical amenities. Even the state did not even bother to import enough COVID vaccines. That's how bad their real realities is. So they have been standing about this for a lot of time. So what happens when something like this is going on, and it's been going on for 8 weeks now. So I think we need to, and this is what I mostly do, I look at an assessment, and the immediate assessment is why, since when, and why now. So we have sort of covered the since when part of it. What remains is why now and why. And why now, as Muntaha also said, that the death of Mahsa Amini, and the reason that hijab was one of the main factors through which a state like Iran's can legitimize homicide, literally murder, and say that she was not wearing hijab, she was showing a bit of hair, so she was inflicted with this atrocity. This in itself is a very significant trigger point. But at this point too, I would like to tell you that this is no longer, and maybe some people might, this is no longer a feminist movement for them. This is a political movement in which the combined issues of all the different classes, all the different representations in Iran that has been subdued is coming out. So now they are not just talking about the hijab, which hijab is, and I know the topic is the headscarf debate, but I really want to tell you that hijab, it started off with it, but it is not really the main focus of Iranian people. They're talking about their economy, they're talking about the rights of their marginalized, the Balochi people, the Iranian Kurdish, the Iranian Arabs, and not just women, LGBTQ, the queer community, their right to have access to education, to employment, to better economic opportunities, and this sort of government that functions completely on their religious identity of being a Shia minority state. So they are talking about everything, and this is more a movement for the freedom of this young Iranian new kind of population demography that is being created, and they are representing that. And another very significant aspect that I want to put here, that in my analysis, and I really want to speak to especially people in India who are Muslims, who have been sort of on a threshold because they don't understand whether really to support them or not support them. That the Iran revolution, the youth, the young people who are protesting, their protest is not anti-Islamic. For them, for a lot of people, the burning of hijab has been taken as an anti-Islamic event. But to be very true, these women are not promoting or establishing a movement which is anti-Islamic. You will find, and it comes to, it may come as a setback to people who are more, who really want the feminist discourse to get there, but I'm hopeful it will come in its due time through its own organic process. But at this point, children who are dying, their mothers, they're screaming that they are going to fight against this, and the mosque in those local areas, these are the centers where they are agitating. And what is giving them even more strength is now this 8 weeks of agitation has started turning these mid-level clerics who are even in the ecclesial, the religious hierarchy, that what the state is doing with these kids of ours, it's not good. This is not how their demands need to be silenced, or what they're doing. So this is a way in which the regime tries to delegitimize the demands of these people by calling them anti-Islamic, because that they know that this is the easiest way to sort of divert their people's attention from what they are actually saying. So they are asking for their rights, but they are not essentially anti-Islamic. So Muslims across the world should not be on threshold, at least in this context, that they would not lend their support to this protest because they are anti-Islamic. So and I sort of understand their hesitation when it comes to Iran. Everything is taken with a pinch of salt. There are so many vested interests in Iran, so many Western vested interests, that even you cannot really depend on the information. Even in the age of information, you cannot depend on the information you're really getting from all the sources. So one has to be very, very careful. And sort of getting to the point where I thought what needs to be done on an individual level or on the level of a space in a very near geographical region who are very interested in what's going on in Iran. There are a lot of people in India who are very interested in it. So my mind sort of came up with two parallel, and it always does, two parallel thoughts, the optimist view and the skeptic realist view. So optimistically speaking, I am euphoric, and not just in Iran, because I see the probability that if this gets more support, a gender sensitive topic triggering can lead to an actual change in an overall society reform. Even the slight probability of that in the 21st century is like a very big deal for us to stay optimistic on it, but also the general atmosphere of what else is happening in Middle East. So Iran is not an isolated event. 10 years ago, when the war started in Syria, a small portion of northeast Syria, very soon into the war, declared themselves autonomous. They did not detach themselves from Syrian territory, they declared themselves autonomous in northeast Iran, and this was done primarily by a group of Kurdish people. Now Kurds, as most of you know, have been one of the most marginalized communities in the Middle East, and they have been fighting in Turkey, in Iraq, in Iran. Their populations are spread all these places, and they've been fighting for sort of getting their own space, their own nation state, as well as in the Middle Eastern region. So this is where the northeastern Syria gets really interesting. They changed the dialogue. They said, we are not a secessionist movement. We don't want a country. We'll stay within Syria, but we want an autonomous region with our own governing factors, right? We'll have our own ideology, sort of our own constitution. And that constitution is based on the ideas of Abdullah Öcalan, who is the leader of PKK, the Kurdish party, the most dominant party in Turkey, and he's currently imprisoned. So Öcalan started early on saying that he's a communist with communist politics, but after he was imprisoned, he came up with this other ideology called democratic confederalism, which really sort of in some ways sounds like ecofeminism, because their most three important tenets is equal participation in politics, gender sensitization and equality, and ecology. So they bring the three concepts together. And when war started in Syria, this gave the PYD, which is the lead Kurdish party, the opportunity to make themselves autonomous. They have now established local self-governing bodies in which there is equal participation, so they speak, for men and women. They also got the opportunity to make militias, because this is a very volatile, violent area. You'll see when they are starting off in 2011-12, after that they have faced Syrian rebels, they have faced Syrian forces, and they have fought ISIS. So they started making these militias, and they have two, by the way. They have one militia, YPG, which is the male militia, and YPJ, who are trained Kurdish women who are, who form the female militia. And the West in 2013-14, when the onslaught against ISIS was very dominant, they were very overtaken by the Rojava. They started calling it Rojava, which in the Kurdish language means Western Kurdistan. But the Rojava revolution has come to stand for this gender equality, just society, equal participation. It's very difficult to travel there to get ground analysis, so very difficult to say how true it is, but whatever little has been done, it shows that there are these women who are learning to fight, who are learning to do they have all the opportunities that the men have. And it sounds like a utopia in the middle of Middle East. I mean, something that without any external support seems to have happened organically, and how much how well it can sustain is a matter of difference. So they got a lot of power when ISIS was expanding, and they were one of the most important forces to stop the onslaught of ISIS, their movement northward. They were the ones at the Kobane siege, after which US also helped a lot, PYD and YPG. And once their agenda was done, the US left away. So now they are under Turkish attack, but nobody cares. But they're still fighting for the idea of Rojava. So something like this happening in Iran right now is not a very big surprise. These ideas that gender equality, questions of the 50% of your population, can, really heckle those sitting at the top and making decisions for everybody, is something that has been going on it's in the wind of Middle East for the past 10-15 years, if not more. So the optimist in me is like really happy, and perhaps this might lead to something. But the skeptical and the realist part of this is that this has been going on for 8 weeks, and just like all social media erupted movements, they are not able to organize it. They're not able to give it a cohesive space. The death toll is 277 by the Iran Human Rights Organization has given that number, but I'm sure this atrocity is much more bigger, and we don't even talk about the psychological impact of something like this. So so what I'm skeptical about is, and Biden has just given 2 days ago a statement that we will free Iran. Now what this does to the people over there is that it instinctively gives the regime this tool to delegitimize the protest, saying that this is Western backed. So, and I think I will speak on behalf of a lot of Americans also when I say nobody wants NATO or West to be intervening in the Middle East anymore, because they leave more in destruction in their wake than they do any real benefit to it. So these people, they have the real issues that they are facing. And these are all very fragmented. So all marginalized sections are there. They are, even though they are shouting, Zan Zindagi Azadi, which is one of the primary slogans of the movement, they are also shouting death to dictator. They are also not happy that Mujtaba, who's Khamenei's son and a mid-level cleric, is being trained to become their next religious leader. They don't want even the factions that want a religious segment, they don't want their religious clerics to get instituted in the monarchy. So they do have a larger popular base in which they can build. But what they lack right now is a organizational structure, and they can't get a leadership in place that is going to take can articulate what their demands are in a way. So how long in these 8 weeks? There are thousands in prisons. There are going to be mass trials, definitely executions. Iran is one of the countries that executes people, the largest number of people. There are going to be people in the aftermath of this who may not be able to live in Iran if the regime does not change or if something doesn't happen. So there are very real, consequences to this. But I also, at the same time, with the same 8-week logics, is that it's been going on for 8 weeks and the regime is not able to do anything about it. So the Ayatollahs and then their puppets, they're not able to really also subdue them because they can't cut the head this time. So they're actually being very smart by not having a very designated leadership, if you see, in a very different context. But what it needs is that it needs more support from people from all sorts of places, not just in the Western world. It needs to be highlighted in almost all countries where gender-based politics is a very, or any sort of marginalized sections are trying for their liberty rights. And they also need, at the same time, the elders from their own community come out and support these young, brave men and women, who are fighting every day for their rights and who are putting up this with all the constraints that their polity brings to them. We went through a hijab debate, which I think will be covered shortly, but we take it for granted that we had a leadership in place, where we knew that they will not sort of betray our sentiments when they represent us, and they will not take a position which is anti-hijab just for the sake of what gender-based politics says in the larger context about hijab, because we will disagree to make a compromise with Hindutva forces. Even if we want people to not wear hijab, women to not be subjugated by any of this, we don't want to make that compromise with Hindutva forces. In Iran, when the revolution happened, unfortunately they sort of kind of tacitly made this compromise, but the fact that they're fighting today, and here's why I believe it's important, that I do not believe in this dichotomy of win and lose. So despite whatever be the outcome of this, what's happening in Iran is going to live on for a very long time, How it's going to be live on as part of the narrative of further struggle or as a part of the narrative of, you know, really making a change, that remains to be decided. But you know, the sacrifice of people, of girls and boys like Mahsa and Nika and Serena and Hadith and Ghazale, all of these countless number of people who have sacrificed their lives and who've come out to speak for so many others who can't, that is going to live on forever. So with that I'll end.